Popular reading. This is not our warm, fuzzy favorite. And I was sort of in a warm, fuzzy favorite kind of mood, so here we are. Very enjoyably, you'll find as soon as my sermon is done, the choir is going to get up and sing Brothers, which seems a little ironic for today. But the story that Jesus is telling us is a part of the spiritual life that simply has to be faced. I was struck when Sharmila's reading. The Master's use of language is so perfect. He used the phrase fruitless desires. And I would say it's a very interesting combination of words, because it's not as if the divine is a tyrant, which it's very easy when we look at this world to just feel that so many things are difficult and so many high aspirations are not realized and so many good-hearted intentions crash on the rocks of who knows what. Fruitless desires, that there's no point in wanting that. It's fruitless. It's sort of, there's a position you get to at a certain point when you realize it's just not going to happen. It doesn't matter how wonderful it might be or how good and how many ways you can justify it. It's just fruitless to feel that way. And it's a very exact way of speaking of it. He doesn't say that they're bad desires. He just says it's not going to happen. You know, however much you might want it, it's not going to happen. And it's not enough to be a good person, to do good works. I mean, the biggest example is that Jesus was crucified. That's what happened to him. And he says, those who are not willing to pick up their cross and follow me, meaning to face into the duality of this world, to stand for the light, even in the midst of shadows. But then the other side of it is that every story about spiritual life does not end in misery. If this whole effort just ended in our being miserable, like, who would do it? And sometimes we ask that question, who would do it? Because it is just such a duality, and it all comes back to the fact that we operate from the wrong part of our own awareness. This is the word ego. And it's just not so simple as to say the ego is the enemy. I don't actually blame ego for a lot of things. It doesn't, in my mind, give me a clear picture. And in one context very recently when I was standing here, I was talking about ego is just a perspective. It's a perspective on the world, a perspective that is either all about me and what I want and my fruitless desires, but no, I want them still to be realized, or whether we're lifting our consciousness from the medulla where the ego is centered to the opposite pole of this chakra and are seeing this world as a divine journey. Just we're going somewhere, and we're going somewhere that we really want to be, but it's an arduous process. I used to read a lot of mountain climbing books, and you'd read these Everest expeditions, and there was always a point where it just became insanely difficult. These are the people who lived through the experience and would be telling you about it afterwards, or else somebody else would be telling you about someone else's experience because you were gone. But we just reach a point of just insane effort, and no rational person you would think you would want to do it. But on the other side of it was this sense of conquest, of victory, of mastery, of freedom, and maybe in some cases egoic gratification. But the result was worth the effort. That's just all there is to it. And all of us go through a process in our lives of making decisions about whether the result is worth the effort. And we also go through the point where we realize not putting out that effort brings a result that we don't want at all. And it's always this balance point, which is why Jesus has to speak so powerfully, because it's always this balance point between these two poles. In the Indian tradition, there's one of the images of Divine Mother is Mother Kali. And Mother Kali is a very deep and fascinating iconic form, which I'm not going to teach and speak about in great length because I've not gone that deeply into it, but we used to take these pilgrimage groups to India over the course of many years, over the course of 20 years. We did it about 12 times maybe. And one of the early trips there, when I was myself just becoming familiar with the culture and the country, the timing of our trip often put us in the festival time, which is this season. And forgive me, but I can't remember the names of all the different festivals, but we would be sometimes, I believe, in Calcutta, where Mother Kali would be the image. And the way it worked at that time was the neighborhoods would get together, and the neighborhoods would all work together, and they would build a huge image of Kali, and they'd put it somewhere on a corner, and then the whole neighborhood would work and celebrate. And it was absolutely marvelous. Mother Kali wears a garland of skulls, and she has a knife or something. Does she have a sword? That's the word I'm looking for. A sword in one hand to chop off your head, and then in the other hand, she holds her hand out in blessing. So she stands just like this, sword and blessing, just one hand each in this image of Divine Mother. I like Divine Mother a little sweeter, but anyway, there she is. So I was there, and the image of Divine Mother, this picture, well, this is the story that I want to say. We were in some narrow streets, and we were walking, the 30 of us, and there were big crowds. The details escape me now, but I was the sweeper, is what you do when we're having a pilgrimage trip. Somebody has to be behind the last person to make sure that last person doesn't just drift away and is never seen again. So I was the sweeper, just keeping everybody in. And we were crowded, and somehow or another, people kept crowding in front of us, which often happens in that country. And we were just backing up incrementally like this. Unbeknownst to me, there was one of these huge collies behind me. And I didn't realize she was behind me until I was about that far away from her. And then I sort of bumped into something, and I turned back, and there she was, just like this. And it was very sudden. And the artists get really exaggerated. She has this red tongue that sticks out. She has this wild black hair. And, she and I were like that, nose to nose. And, she just scared me like this. And I thought, I need to settle this. I need to settle this with you. Like, who are you? What is this? And I just stood there looking at that. And then what I could feel, because an image like that, there was some human instrument at some point who brought that forward artistically. It didn't just drop onto the planet. There was some great sage, lost in antiquity now, who had this relationship with the divine. But the relationship that he had, or she had, was one of experience and revelation. The craziness of this world parted. And that great spirit perceived reality as it is. And this is what it looked like. And then tried to communicate that in some way that would also bypass our reason and our intellect and our this and our that, and just give us a symbol that would communicate what the deeper reality of this world is. There's the blessing, there's the sword. And how do you separate the mother in this case? This is two of her, she probably has multiple arms, I believe she does, but these are two of them. And they're both happening absolutely at the same time. The desire and the futility of it. And the other phrase that was in that was the withered hopes. The withered hopes. These words just are so appallingly apt. But the rest of the prayer poem that Sharmila was reading was that I want to repudiate everything that keeps me small. And this is what Divine Mother does. She hacks to pieces everything that we don't like. I'm going to read to you There's this woman in Colorado, and I was there a couple of weeks ago, and I'd only met her online, so I met her in person. Her name is Anya Om Devi. Some of you know her. She's from Ireland, and she writes a lot of poetry. This is her little book. She writes very good poetry. She has a good Irish sense of humor, too. This is a tribute to Gary McSweeney. Gary, let's see, what was that day? There was one day when Gary was at the bagel shop, and there was a stranger there who was convinced he was a rabbi. And it was the same day that somebody else was absolutely convinced that I was Irish, so we changed identities for one day. So, Anya Om Devi, this is to Kali Ma. She says, "Your women have entered my house with their scouring brushes and hot water. Where can I hide my shame? They are penetrating my deepest closets. What sort of women have you sent? Is there no limit to their fury? Even at night they are rattling, removing, replacing all my household goods. Have mercy on my fear. It's looking for somewhere to hide those worn-out ancient treasures of grievances and self-pity. Even now they are marching into the basement of my dreams, disinfecting and removing all vestiges of that which my fear holds dear. Is there no end to this commotion? Do you have anything to say?" I read that this morning and I thought, boy, that's what it feels like. All the places and all the things that my fear holds dear. And then, Mother Kali, you send your cleaning women in, and they just have no respect for my delusions. And that's just basically exactly the way it is. And this is not an easy problem, is it? When they were singing Many Hands Make a Miracle, I remembered this time. Lots of things happened over many years. We were in some stage of development in what we were doing here, and we were trying, I thought it would be a good idea, to try to make I know what it was. We didn't talk enough about community. And as it happens, this is a weekend when we've been celebrating community, and David and others will speak in a moment about what we're doing. But I felt we didn't talk enough about community in our Sunday service, although when you think about it, what is our Sunday gathering except community? But so I thought it would be fun if we brought Many Hands Make a Miracle into this Sunday morning celebration. So we had this idea that we would, at the end of the service, we would all get up together, and I think we would even join hands, and we would sing Many Hands Make a Miracle. Making such a change in the Sunday service, Swami Kriyananda was still living at the time. So I discussed it with him, and I told him what we were going to do, and he approved it. And we started doing this, and I think even the ministers came off the dais and joined the people, all on one level. And we went on like that. We had a lot of fun with it for a month or two. And I was still in touch with Swami. Then I started sharing it with other people, and all of a sudden I got a huge pushback, and Swami changed his position on it and decided that it really wasn't. He didn't think it was the right tone for that point in the service. After we've done the Festival of Light, after everything, it just brought the energy too much outward again, and too much into, here we are all together, this sort of energy, which is really what we want sometimes. But the deeper union that we want has to be an internal union, because if we're clinging to this and having spent as much time as we do in the Festival of Light, in the blessing, in everything that's happened, it's better to hold that energy more inward rather than just immediately applying it to our withered desires or our withered hopes again. That this world itself will be something that is never going to be. And at the same time, we're not on the spiritual path to suffer. See, that's the gigantic mistake that the Catholics made, the Christians made. Jesus was definitely crucified. I mean, that's just one of the things that happened. But he was resurrected. 3 days later, he stood up and came out of that. But for some reason, I mean, Jesus resurrected could have been the symbol of the whole experience of Jesus, but it became Jesus crucified. I was in Europe with Swamiji many years ago, and we went to some classical museum. Maybe we were in Florence. I'm not quite sure where we were. And we went and looked at a lot of religious paintings. And a lot of the religious paintings were Jesus on the cross in various stages of despair, and all the people around him in all their various stages of despair. And I mean, they were gorgeous paintings. Some of them were magnificently moving. We came out, and Swami, just referring to all that, said, I think it's time for a new theme, he said. I think we've taken that one about as far as we need to take it, which is pretty much what it is. Also, somewhere, I think it was in Vienna, I happen to remember, I saw a crucified Christ. Of course, I don't make a habit of I'm not an art specialist. It was a picture of Jesus on the cross, but he was not bound. It was very interesting. He was not bound. The image was like this, but you can see, what is this image? This is the image of triumph, isn't it? This is what the winner does at the end. You know, this is what the defeated one does. So often the picture is this one, but this is the one. And that's the life we're living, isn't it? That and the masters tell us, well, they quote from the autobiography in this book, Amar was basking in the familial warmth. And that phrase is often repeated in the course of many years of following this path, just basking in the familial warmth. Now, bear in mind, if you're raising children, you want those children to do nothing but bask in the familial warmth. That's your responsibility. But simultaneously, what we have to teach ourselves and everyone is what is the real source of that warmth. You know, where does that really come from? When we were at the beginning of founding the schools that we now have here, we went around to some of the other private schools in the area just to kind of get a feel for what was happening. We went to one of the most highly regarded private schools near us, and it's a good school. There's nothing wrong with it except everything. But that's why we started our own school. In the context of what it's trying to do, it's doing it very well and creatively and all the things that you want. But there's a phrase in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras called missing the point, where you get everything right except you just miss the point. So because we actually have enjoyed this over many years, that very often, oddly, our way of presenting our school gets picked up by other schools you would think wouldn't do it. You know, because we talk about self-worth and we talk about spirituality, and they like it. And for the most part, unfortunately, they turn it a little, like this was not from us, but self-esteem, of course, is a big deal with children. You want them to be strong in themselves and so on. Of course, it's important. So they made this tree of self-esteem, and every child brought a leaf, put it on the tree. I think it was like a 4th or a 5th grade class. And I read it really carefully. There were probably at least 30 leaves on that tree. 29 of them said, I feel good about myself because I have accomplished something externally. You know, I scored the goal in the game. I got 100% on this test. But everyone but one. One said, I'm less moody than I used to be. But then what happens when you can't score the goal? What happens when you're physically injured and can't play the sport anymore? You know, what happens when somebody twice as smart as you comes in? What happens when the judge on the debate, system is corrupt and you lose? You know, what happens to your father when he loses his job, when your mother when something happens. You want them to bask in the familial warmth, but you want that warmth to be the presence and the power of the divine within, that we are a part of a greater reality, that we are not just our little egos, and we're here to, if I set my mind to it, I can get it, to have nothing but fruitless desires and withered hopes. We can yell at this world and tell it we want it to be different. We can raise our fists at the people around us who aren't behaving the way they're supposed to. We can spend endless hours commenting on things on social media. Some of you know that because of the efforts of my friend Ishani, who's a nice Jew married to an Irishman, now that I think about it. She happens to be married to Gary's son, Aryavan, and she's Israeli, Jewish, so we're all pals together here. Ishani is very talented at social media, and she's created an Instagram account out of very little material, but she's managed to make it work quite. Now, let's see, what was the point? Oh, I was going to say, and she amuses me with the comments that we get. Okay, this is natural. This color of my hair, this is natural. My father was 80-something, and he died with hair this color. So this is what I actually look like. Although it's finally turning white, so I might turn out like you guys before it's over. There's comments on there. If she's such a spiritual person, why does she dye her hair? I said, Ishani, why don't you write to that person, have you thought of getting a life? Like, who would care whether I dye my hair or not? But this is the world that we're living in, where we're just always just going like this. And it's a tide. It's a very powerful tide. And it's a tide in all cultures, and it's especially one in ours, where people are running madly like lemmings, just going nowhere. Oh, Tandava, you have that wonderful poem somewhere about lemmings. I'm looking in the room. Is Tandava in the room? Tandava, for the month of April, when he would write, I think in the month of April, he would write a poem every day. Before he was a school teacher, I'm not sure he can do it now. And one year he wrote all about animals, and he wrote one about lemmings. Lemmings are I suppose it's true that they're a land creature, right? And they all go to a cliff and then just throw themselves into the sea and all die. And it's a wonderful poem. And it just basically, it lists all the names of all the other lemmings who were doing it. So-and-so was doing it, my best friend, the one I grew up with, the ones I respected the most, and they were all doing it, so I did too. Seemed like a good idea at the time. Because that force, the familial warmth, the comfort, the subconsciousness, everybody around me feels this way. And that's why Jesus had to talk like he talked. That's why he had to say, your enemy is in your household. It's your mother-in-law. It's your own children. It's your parents. That doesn't sound like family values, That's not what we're supposed to be about. But that's why he had to talk that way, because he had to wake us up from the stupor of fruitless desires and withered hopes. Because he loves us, because God loves us, because Mother Kali loves us. She's going to hack to pieces everything that keeps us from really fulfilling our destiny. And we cling like fools to these tiny little things because they're the only comfort we have. But we have to go deeper. We just have to go deeper. And at some point, the balance tips. That's all I can say. The balance tips, and at least tentatively, we're just willing to risk it a little bit. And then we discover, wow, this is a lot better than I thought. So we're going to pull the other foot up, move 1/4 of an inch. But if Jesus said to us, just be a little better than you are, we would just cling right where we are at all times. And his life, so dramatic, ends with this power. After facing the worst that he could imagine, he resurrects from the dead and shows us that there is no limit, not only to our power and to our consciousness, but the word that really counts, to our potential for joy, which is all that we're seeking, all of us. That's all we want. We just want to avoid suffering and find happiness, and we won't find it in fruitless desires and withered hopes. The only way we'll find it, standing strong, facing Mother in both her forms, and just saying, Lord, thy will be done. God bless you.
Countries and mixed with many men, crushed in the days of sunshine, gone with them in the rain. The fires at evening said we were brothers. The fires at evening said we were brothers. A soldier I saw weeping beside a dying friend. My officers had said I must aid him till the end. But seeing his grief I knew we were brothers. But seeing his grief I knew we were brothers.
A man sat on a doorstep to see the children play. The gentle way he smiled there would charm your fears away. A stranger he, but love made us brothers. A stranger he, but love made us brothers.
One day I climbed a mountain with friends of other lands.
The words we used were different, but joy one understands.
Our gladness in God's world made us brothers. Our gladness in God's world made us brothers. The words and customs vary like waves upon the sea. One life beneath the surface binds everyone to me. Who knows the truth knows all men as brothers. Who knows the truth knows all men as brothers. Then brothers, why endeavor to set ourselves apart? The fences we've been building squeeze tight upon our hearts. Come sing the truth that all men are brothers. Come sing the truth that all